Hi, Muse. It's me again. Your... What do you call me? Am I your writer? Your artist? Yeah, I call you my muse. What, when you're sitting around talking to your other muses, what do you call us? Am I just your human? And what are you? What is your title besides muse? Or are you a spirit or... Ah... Muse, this was one of those days where I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to talk to you about. I had a couple of ideas, a couple of subjects that I wanted to address, but in the end, I just couldn't decide which one to decide. Just couldn't decide which one to decide upon. Ugh. And I call myself a writer? I couldn't come to any sort of viable conclusion. So, and I'm not going to just have this little general thing. It waffled between not giving up and how to create a character. And I think I've addressed not giving up enough. Even though I was really excited about rickrolling you, Muse, never going to give you up, blah, blah, blah. But truth be told, I think there's more value in us talking about how to create a character. Because I don't know how many times, and this is not just unique to the written word. I don't know how many times I have seen, I have read, I have watched on television or movies, generic people. And when that happens, it never fails that I stop to ask myself, when was the last time I actually saw a generic person? Now, I can go outside. I can go outside and I can go people watching. And I think I can find some fairly generic people. I think. On the surface. They dress the same. They all have on their button-downs or their polos and their khakis and their little brown loafers. And sometimes they'll have their smartphone attached to their belt. And they seem to be pretty generic. And then you hear them interacting with people and you don't detect much of a personality to be had. But that's the surface. Then you take the time to get to know that person and you discover that, much to your surprise, they actually have some depth. Now, it doesn't matter what they believe. Well, it does matter what they believe in and what they hold dear, and that does matter. Because when you discover those things, then you can draw a conclusion as to whether or not you want to be a part of their circle. But as for discovering whether or not they are simply a one or two-dimensional person, it's generally pretty surprising that you find that it's a rare occasion that you find a truly two-dimensional person. Because we all have our facets that all combine together to make us a complete person. But how do you write that person? How do you put on paper a character that has depth? Well, it's actually kind of easy. And you really only have to ask yourselves, self. You only have to ask a few questions. What does this person want? What does this person need? What is in the way of that person getting what they want or need? Those three questions alone will help any writer create more interesting and deep characters. Any character you put on page, if you've asked those questions, will automatically become improved. Now, of course, you have to go further than that, because you have to also ask, what purpose does this character serve in this story? Because you can't just throw characters in. Yes, you're going to have to put in incidental characters. These little tiny, not tiny, these people that are in one scene or in just a moment in a scene that just kind of random passersby. But even they have a purpose. You can't just have your main character walking down the street. Hey, wave to somebody. You can't do that. Because why? Why would you have your character walking down the street and just randomly say hello to somebody? There has to be a reason for it. Now, maybe the reason is to simply show that your character has never met a stranger. You know the saying. My father was one of those people. My father and I, when my father was alive and well, if we went out in the public, doesn't matter where we went, doesn't matter what city we were in, I could take him out of his little city that he lived in into the big city, and we could be walking through a store or just walking down the street, and my dad would just say hi. Or my dad would see something that interested him in a person, and he would approach that person and start a conversation. Like if we're outside of his hometown and he saw somebody wearing a baseball cap of a sports team that he liked, he would approach that person and have a conversation about it. He didn't care. And he had the personality. He was so genuine that he had the ability to walk up to people without seeming to be threatening, and they would want to have a conversation with him. That's a unique and rare characteristic in a person, especially these days. Because for the most part, we don't want to go outside. We don't want to interact with people, and people don't want us to interact with them. But even today, if my dad were still alive, he would be able to walk outside, talk to anybody. So, in that instance, if I were writing a character like my father, and he was walking down the sidewalk, and he just randomly said hello to somebody, it wouldn't be just him saying hello to somebody. It would be him it would be that character displaying this trait of his. And it wouldn't just be him saying hello to one person. He would say hello to one person, and another person, and another person, and he would probably stop and have a conversation with one of those passers-by. Why did he do that? Because that's just who he was. Because he was friendly and outgoing, and he wanted people to be comfortable. So what if you decided to write that character? That character's main purpose is to make everybody around him feel comfortable. How does he do that? He has conversations with them. What is in the way of that character getting what he wants? Well, some people won't want to talk to him. And then how does he overcome that hurdle? He might approach someone and say, "Hey, your hat. I like that sports team." And they may be like, "Oh, wait, I don't know you." He's like, "I don't know. I know you don't know me, but we have this in common. What about this sports team's quarterback?" And all of a sudden he's broken the ice, and those two people are engaged. And if you want to practice with this, one of the very interesting thing you can do is it's interesting. It's also very hard. It also might reveal some things that you don't want revealed. Ask these questions about yourself. Now, and when you ask these questions of yourself, what do you want? Oh, I want to have a giant publishing contract with one of the big 5 publishers. No. That's inconsequential. We're talking big picture here. What do you want? What do you want? I want to survive in a seemingly unsurvivable world. I want to retain my sanity in a world that begs to steal it from me. We're talking big picture here. Really, really dive deep into your psyche. And then once you've answered that question, answer the question, what is in the way of you getting what you want? And you can make it simple. What do you need? Right now, my stomach's grumbling. I need lunch. What's in the way of me getting lunch? Well, I'm having a conversation with you, Muse. You are in the way of me having lunch right now. not really. I just had a Cliff Bar. I'm okay. So those are some fairly basic questions you can ask of your characters. And I would put it forth to every writer out there that it's not just on them to ask those questions of the main characters and the secondary characters and the tertiary characters. Every character, if you put a character on the page, you ask those questions. Now, there could be an instance where a character that you put on the page is what is in the way of the main character getting what he wants or needs. And maybe that character that you put on the page, what they want is to stop the main character from getting what they want or need. And when you have the answer to that question, then you have to say, how do they do it? So you can dive down in that rabbit hole and keep asking sub-question and after sub-question after sub-question until you have this whole list of questions that you asked of your characters that really flesh that thing out. Because the last thing you want to do is put a character on the page that's not been fleshed out, that you don't know, that is just generic person. Now, one of the fun things is you can take that person, you can place a seemingly generic person on the page, but then give them this depth that is revealed. Maybe it's revealed slowly. But that's a more complicated process, but it's also intriguing as hell. But what you should probably do is have a file in the hierarchy of your directories. So you have, if you use Google Docs, you have Google Docs and you have books. And then under books, you've got each of your books that you've written. Well, you should also have a file, a directory that contains a number of files that you reference to as you're writing a book. And one of those reference files should be questions to be asked and answered by every character. And you write out all of those questions. And then you copy that file into the working directory of the book you're writing at the moment. And then every time you introduce a new character, you refer to that file and you answer those questions for that character. Because if you start peppering your book with just random generic characters, you're going to wind up with a random generic book. And we've all read them. You're reading a book and you're like, wait a minute, who is this? Who is what? What's going on? Where's the story? I don't get this. I'm not following this book. Part of the reason why some books are so hard to follow is because their characters, it's just a wash of generic people. And nobody wants to read that. So, what do they want? What do they need? What is in the way of what they want? What is in the way of what they need? Those are 4 questions. Those are the 4 basic questions that every character should have asked and answered before they were put on the page. And you can get by with just those 4 questions. But you could also ask, what is this character's tragic flaw? Because we all have tragic flaws. Right? And if you don't know what a tragic flaw is that one generally secretive flaw that could take us down individually. I have mine, you have yours. Ask yourself, look in the mirror and ask yourself, what is my tragic flaw? I know what mine is. I'm not going to tell you what it is, but I know what it is. Like, what was Hannibal Lecter's tragic flaw? Was it that he was just smarter than everybody else? Was it that he couldn't resist the taste of human flesh? See where I'm going? What was go through every character that you could think of right off the top of your head, and try to answer what their tragic flaw was. That's a great question to apply to your characters. Or was there an incident in their childhood that led this person to become who they are? When I was 7 years old, this is true, this is me. When I was 7 years old, I developed what is called hip and calf perthus. That is a bone degenerative disease wherein it attacks young children, and the ball joint of the hip joint, the ball loses the oxygen supply and the blood flow, and it dies and it disintegrates. So I lost the ball in the ball joint of my right hip. Because of that, this was a long time ago. Because of that, I wound up going to the hospital a lot and having very long stays in the hospital. And at first I wore a corrective shoe that didn't work. I wore a brace that didn't work. I was put in different types of. I was put in casts, and then finally they did an experimental operation and put a pin in my leg, so that it would hold my leg into place so the ball joint could grow back. And I was in a full body cast at one point, and I was in a cast that had 2 bars in it that kept my legs splayed apart. And after about a year, I was able to walk again. But it was because of that disease was a catalyst for a number of factors that caused me to be who I am. Some of them are psychological, some of them are physical. And I have plenty of stories that I could tell you, Muse, but I'm not going to right now. But that was something in my past that not a lot of people knew about, but that helped in my development, be it good or bad. So as you're writing, especially with your protagonist and your antagonist, ask yourself that question. What was it in their childhood? What one particular instance in their childhood caused them to be who they are? Here's another one for me. For the longest time, I had this absolutely irrational fear of getting lost. Profoundly irrational. Like, if I thought I was lost, especially driving, I would panic. Now, it's not that way anymore thanks to Google Maps. But it took me a very long time to realize why that was. Well, when I was a very young child, this was before the surgery, so I was probably 5 years old. I remember my mom and I were walking downtown in this little town that I lived in. She was holding my hand, I guess, and it was a sidewalk sale or something. There were all these racks and stuff, and somehow we got separated. And I could not find her, and I panicked. And finally, somebody managed to get us back together, but it was that instance that caused me in my adult life to have this profound fear of being lost. See where I'm going at with that? We are shaped by those instances. And when you ask yourself those questions about your characters and you answer those questions, your characters become incredibly rich and deep and interesting. Because that little moment, once you've applied that little moment to your character, it all of a sudden starts to fill in a bunch of little voids. And not only that, but it will inspire you to give this character other traits. And it might also lead you into alleys that you might not have taken that character into. So, there you go. That's a quick and easy way to help you write more interesting, deeper, and more dimensional characters for your books. Thanks to me to releasing to you some of the things that happened to me as a child. Blah, blah, blah. Anyway, I can walk and chew gum at the same time now. Still, so anyway, Muse. That's all I got. Muse, what you got? Nothing? You got nothing? Oh, that's okay. I am happy to have imparted on to you this blathering bit of wisdom, Muse, because, you give me so much. You're a giver, Muse. You're just a giver. And because of that, you, my friend, are awesome.